Welcome to the Week in Sports Cars on the Marshall Pruett podcast, presented by Cooper Tires, and I'm confident he knows what to say next. And presented by...
It's me! Good evening, Marshall. Graham Goodwin, editor of Daily Sports Car, broadcasting to you this week from a rather bijou villa on the Algarve in Portugal, the aftermath of looking after TV duties and Daily Sports Car duties at the European Le Mans Series finale over the weekend.
So we had you and the DSC team at the Algarve. We also had myself down at WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca on Friday for what I call Petit Blancpain, the 8 hours of California, headed up by the SRO, and also our friends at the World Challenge Series. Got lots of great questions that have come in. Mr. Goodwin, many of the ELMS, WEC, Asian Le Mans Series variety, fewer this go-round on IMSA. So I figure in our continual shuffle of what we should lead off with, let's go with the questions in highest demand. So shall we kick off with the WEC ELMS Asian Le Mans Series fun?
Yeah, let's go have a crack at that. Actually, the first one is actually on the list here. It's from Jerry Robert Sudduth. Talks about the latest issue of that fabulous magazine. Nothing whatsoever to do with the yellow and black website of the same broad name, Motorsports, UK-based monthly, as a retrospective on the Mercedes CLR and the ordeal of the multiple flips of the 1999 24 Hours of Le Mans. What are your memories of the program? What do you remember thinking at the time? Well, I can tell you what I thought. I was actually there as a fan that year with my then still relatively young son. And the reality was it was quite a slow burn. We hadn't had access to the moving pictures. We hadn't seen the flip. So it was sort of one of those moments where it all sort of happened in slow motion. For whatever reason, at that point, we weren't listening to the radio either, which is very unusual at that stage. So actually, it was all really garnered from the chatter at trackside. And once you realise what had happened, because the 1999 race, little like the 1998 race, which is another disaster for Mercedes-Benz and for that matter for BMW, was good grief. Are these factory efforts falling apart again? I think often when we think, MP, about people's recent memories of perhaps the Nissan GT-R LM, and maybe before that the Aston Martin AMR1, people tend to forget that this isn't the first time that a major factory effort has ended in a bit of ignominy. We had quite a lot of that in the late 90s as development curves there were on a bit of a roll. The first Williams-designed prototype for BMW failing at Le Mans. The same kind of issues, or rather issues, for the Mercedes GT-R LM and then the CLR the following year. One should realise what had happened. It all really left a bit of an unpleasant taste in the mouth of perhaps team management taking too many risks and liberties with the lives and limbs of those good fellas that earn their living peddling their lovely silver race cars. That was my recollection of it. I don't know about you.
My major takeaway at the time, and so when that happened, I was working in both kart and the Indy Racing League. I remember being taken aback by the lack of understanding by Mercedes-Benz regarding the aerodynamics on that car. First of all, I guess the first thing I was surprised by, but was also pleasantly surprised by, was the fact that they went with a naturally aspirated V8, which was a bit adventurous in that formula in that time, and yet they were quick and successful. The cars were very slippery. We saw that. You could just tell that. You wouldn't have to know a lot about aerodynamics to look at that the Merc and say, "Ooh, that's
wow,
a low drag machine." But what struck me, and I realize we're talking 20-ish years ago, was even back then there was plenty of full-scale wind tunnel work going on. There was a lot of information and data that would have been gathered about the vehicle's downforce, drag, lift, you name it. And yeah, the lasting memory I have from when that happened, Jerry, was, not only did this happen multiple times, but I'm really surprised that they seem to be caught unawares by the fact that this could happen and the conditions that would create this. So we haven't seen a lot of blowovers since then. Not saying we haven't seen any, but we haven't seen a lot of blowovers since then. I know one of the lasting effects from it, for sure, was manufacturers with full-bodied prototypes saying, aha, in our wind tunnel work, our scale model work, and more recently CFD, we are going to truly throw every oddball scenario we can at our car to try and make sure we aren't living in infamy. I mean, think about this. 20 years later, Mark Webber, Peter Dumbreck, they still get asked questions about it. I mean, it's just still such a visceral thing seen around the world's biggest sporting event. And so, yeah, manufacturers really don't want to be next up. Hey, let's take the baton. We'll be the ones talking about our cars doing, a triple Lindy through the air, and, the Austrian judge giving it a 9.8 and the Russians give it a 9.4. And, yeah, nobody wants to be that manufacturer.
Absolutely. I should actually just add, by the way, that we're making an assumption that listeners know this is, of course, the car that famously flew like a leaf through the air in the hands of Peter Dumbreck during the race. But that had already happened twice before in the race meeting, with Mark Webber being reassured by the team that work had been done to solve the problem that had seen him upside down once, and then it happening again. Morning warm-up, from memory? Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
But the other thing that I do recall about this, which talks to our stateside listeners, is that previous testing for the cars, rather unusually, was at Homestead. So those cars... Yeah, absolutely. So there you go. So that's not the most auspicious of entries in the history book for Mercedes-Benz, it should be said, and probably one of the reasons why they've not been back since, because that is clearly the historical touchstone for that effort. It would be lovely to see them back. It'd be great to see them back in high-level prototypes or GT racing at Le Mans, but my guess is that's one of the reasons why we've not seen them back since, MP.
And that leads perfectly into the next question from our friend Andrew Baca, good old Baxter, who says, in the original announcements for Car, what we're calling Hypercar, whatever the 2020 ACO LMP1 replacement ends up being named, Andrew says active aerodynamics were mentioned in the original announcements. In the latest release from the ACO, active aerodynamics were not mentioned. Are they still in the plans, or have they been dropped?
I think the answer is this goes back to the original 2020 regulations, where there are an awful lot of things that were mentioned that have not come to pass. You're quite right, Andrew. No mention of it. I think it's fallen victim to a number of other priorities, one of which is the radical cost-cutting agenda that's come into play to do two things: to try to keep as many manufacturers in the mix as you possibly can, and two is to retain, because I think they've learned a lesson, retain at least the possibility of well-funded privateers being in the future top class. So no, I don't think we're going to see active aerodynamics. That also, by the way, speaks to the agenda they've actually got to keep radical controls on the aerodynamic efficiency of the cars, not to allow a development curve, and therefore mean that it's relatively easy in technical terms to achieve the performance window. It means that should mean that you don't get massive development curves coming into play, because even if you did put in a massive development budget, you will not be allowed to exceed the efficiency and the performance laid down by regulation. The advantage to you and I, if we see that as an advantage, is that should mean that the cars that do race are pretty close together on performance, so you should get close racing. That's the theory. We'll wait and see what actually happens in terms of factories, and for that matter privateers, that decide to step up and announce any programs that might be coming to bear in the latter part of this year, but more likely, I think, in the earlier part of next.
I'm just going to keep serving up some of these questions that are meant for you, Mr. Goodwin, our WEC, ELMS, and we'll get to this a little later. I believe it was the Asian lesbian series someone might have asked about. Could that be something?
I'm hoping that was just one of those predictive text things. Otherwise, mate, you're looking at the wrong website.
Well, it actually, if I remember, the question was regarding the Asian Lesbians Mans series. So
yes,
I'm
it's a bit
just
further
as
down.
confused.
It's here somewhere.
Yes. So, but hey, maybe we should advertise that we now cover that series.
Well, let's have a crack at that one. I've got it in front of me right now. Graham Ingleby, I don't want to see your browser history. It's the end of the season, excluding the WEC, and he does indeed say the Asian Lesbian Mans. What are you going to be doing until it all starts up again? Well, I can answer for myself, which is I'm going to be doing the WEC and the Asian Le Mans series. I've got TV duties for both, pleased to say, and got details today of what the TV package, at least in terms of what we're going to be putting into that, our end of the programme, is going to be for Asia Le Mans. You will be able to follow the whole series, the whole qualifying and the race is live, again, streamed on the usual platforms with the same team as last year and some additional coverage and an opportunity to see us all at work. So that's all good news. So that's going to be me. At the moment, I have to tell you, I'm actively planning what and who are going to be part of what I think we now call in DSC Towers Mad January, with just something significant just about every week from Christmas through to, well, realistically now mid to late February, with the various changes in calendar that are coming. So the answer is lots of racing. There's not a lot of time off. You will, if this podcast goes up this evening, Monday evening my time, or indeed early morning tomorrow, you will be hearing some exciting news of entries to come in the Gulf 12 Hours at Abu Dhabi that might well see Delhi Sports Car heading over there for that. That comes pretty close to Christmas. There is not a long time between that and when I'm sure you'll be making your way down to Daytona International Speedway, MP, for the Raw before the 24 Hours. But even before that, we'll have got stuck in with more Asia Le Mans series into the new year and the 24 Hours of Dubai.
I am almost seeing a new Roger Warwick cartoon of the Asian Lesbians Man series, so that's pretty awesome. Yes, and I'm hoping that all will be going well, and I will indeed be getting on a flight headed to the Roar before the 24 in early January. Just a quick little sidebar here, because I like to try and keep our podcast family aware. We're recording on a Monday for kind of the first time ever, I think, and I'm also actually recording the Week in IndyCar a little bit later today with our friend Dale Coyne Racing engineer Craig Hampson, because my wife and we are heading into surgery tomorrow morning, and once we get that ball rolling, I'll then have a fairly fixed schedule afterwards. So since Tuesday and then Wednesday, maybe Thursday, and even more, just going to be dedicated at home to taking care of my bride instead of going typety-type on a keyboard and rambling into microphones, trying to get podcast stuff done early. And so hopefully that'll hold you over for the rest of the week. And I got a few other things too, Graham, that I'm trying to write in advance that I can send in and they can use while I am away from the computer. So, but yes, definitely looking forward to getting back into some IMSA action in early January. I'm going to go...
Well,
go ahead.
Before you do that, I'm going to add this, because I know our listeners would want me to do so. We are all sending our best wishes and all our love to you guys. I'm sure that's going to be a difficult time coming ahead, but you're strong. You love each other very much. That's very, very clear, and that's all that matters. Let's get it done, and let's move on forward to better things.
Well, amen. That's my girl. What else would I be doing? Let's see. We're just going to go in chronological order here. From DCV, who says, if the EOT, that being equivalence of technology, eventually balances the grid to an extent where privateer LMP1 cars will be fighting for the win with Toyota, will they be dialed back for Le Mans? And will Toyota demand it? And what if the ACO refused to allow Toyota's desire? So interesting. Do you think we might get the choking of Toyota to create competition in LMP1? Do you think we might get to a place where privateers are holding high ground, Graham, or is that just a fantasy?
We can get closer. I've done a lot of digging around in this one. We are at the stage where the current progress is defined almost not just by the willingness of the various parties to comply, but also where we might be with the ability of the privateer cars to perform, or indeed their level of current reliability. However, there is one thing that could still be done. They could give them more fuel. We could get to the stage with a pretty simple change where the privateer cars could circulate quicker by not having to lift and coast. It caused a major rumpus at Fuji when the EOT change came in the middle of free practice 3. So put that in another terms, that meant that those teams that could make the change for the most part with a driver selected option, so it was all to do with fuel flow, they could do that. But that meant that they had less than one track session to test those cars and to practice with those cars in the trim with which they would race. That's not very smart, it has to be said, and it's not very fair either. So what do I hope for? I hope we're going to see a significant shift again before we go racing at Shanghai in just a couple of weeks' time. What do I expect? I expect there will be a change because I think the response from the privateer group was a significant one. And I think if they're going to retain the confidence of that privateer group moving into 2019 and into the following season, where, you know, the reality is there's not going to be a dramatically different look to the numbers of cars that are going to step forward. There might well be a bit of a change. Something is in the air in the background at the moment. But the reality is these are people that the ACO need to make sure are happy with their current level of, you know, 7-figure investment in those programs, and they're also likely to be the people most likely to step up for a privateer hypercar in 2020, 2021. So it needs to be right. It isn't yet right. They can make a change. They should make a change. Will Toyota determine what happens at Le Mans in 2019? They certainly have a significant say in this. I am sniffing that they are beginning to see significant value in being seen to be, actually subject to some competition. It was great to hear from Pascal Vasselon, the technical director of Toyota at Fuji, that one of the things he thinks is a massive plus for the forthcoming hypercar car regulations in 2020, 2021 is that the performance parameters mean for the first time that a privateer stepping up to those regulations is guaranteed to be have the ability to be competitive with any factory cars that come to that set of regulations. That's what those regulations say. We've not got any more of this nonsense about 2% here or 4% there, or, ifs, buts, maybes and vertical development curves. The reality is the performance envelope should be tight enough that if you spend your 16 million or whatever it might be on a privateer effort, you should be able to compete head to head with a factory effort spending probably somewhat more than that.
Hashtag Major Rumpus. You always have
Major Rumpus.
Fine of them words for us today. I also heard religiosity used.
Religiosity?
Yes, that was used in interviews today by one of my government's advisors to our president.
Fantastic.
We're going to go to our friend Stathis Coco. Says, assuming the privateers and LMP1 will improve their packages. Hey, man, this is a family show. Trying to keep this, Are we going to see a possibility of having to slow them down because the EOT of Spa, for example, is too much? These cars have gone in development for almost a year only, and that's the main reason they don't deliver. So similar to the last question, but more on the lines of
on the other side.
Do you think how much do you think is left on the privateer LMP1 development side for teams to just become faster without EOT being involved?
I think there's always things you can do. Remember, they do have a degree of freedom, particularly with aerodynamic development here. The key, I think, right now is answered by the answer to the first question. Are the organising body capable of making a decision, willing to make a decision that frees up some more of that potential performance? Because if they're not, then why would you spend that money to actually, add a tenth here or half a second there if the bigger issue is the fact they're being beaten by 3 laps in a 6-hour race? I think there is a test here for the willingness of the whole group. And by the whole group, I mean the governing body, I mean the FIA, I mean the ACO, I mean the cabal of privateers, and for that matter of Toyota, to work together for the common good. The common good here is good competition. It's great TV. It is racing that we can talk about being exciting. That's not the case right now in LMP1. Yes, the Toyotas are pushing. Yes, at times that's providing exciting viewing, but it's not enough. And I think more and more people are coming to that conclusion, even some of those people that are involved with a vested interest in this debate. So let's wait and see what happens for Shanghai. I can tell you this much: if something doesn't happen for Shanghai, I think you're going to hear some loud voices being used very loudly sometime before we actually get to the next WEC race, which, remember, we've got to wait some time for because it's at Sebring in March next year.
Amen. Well, let's see. We're just going to keep rocking and rolling here. We're going to go to Stuart Hart, who asks, when the 2019 Le Mans grid is selected in February, will they also select the 2019 and 2020 WEC grid, or will the WEC grid be selected after Le Mans 2019?
Well, it's a good question. The answer, I'm actually waiting for the answer to much the same question, Stuart, and it's one of a myriad of issues that is thrown up by now this disparity between the ELMS calendar and not just the WC calendar, but also the Asia Le Mans Series calendar, which is another winter calendar. And because the Asia Le Mans Series coming into next year, so the current season just about to start, finishes later, finishes actually the last weekend in February, that too comes after the traditional point when we've had the announcement of the Le Mans entry, and for that matter the WEC entry and the ELMS entry. So I'm waiting for an answer on exactly that question, and we'll bring that back to you guys for, I hope, one of the shows in the next couple of weeks, because it does, you're quite right, Stuart, throw up a couple of interesting questions. And I know Stuart's also asked, could in theory an all-new P1 team, for instance, he's suggesting a Ginetta factory team, be selected for Le Mans in 19 if they've committed to enter the following WEC season? There are all sorts of quite complex situations in which we might see an additional LMP1 car added to the Le Mans, for that matter, the WEC grid, none of which are simple. But remember this. Yes, we've got regulations. Those regulations are long and at times tedious. But the reality is, beyond the absolute that is a full season entry in the WEC is entitled to an entry at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, this is an invitation race. So the selection committee, should something come forward that they decide is in the best interests of that race, could decide to make an exception to whatever rules are there to say this is for the greater good, and have done in previous years, done that. So let's wait and see what happens. It is a very good question, and I will bring the answer to that question back as soon as I possibly can. Please do keep reminding me, Stuart, that's something that we should be catching up with you on. Next one up is from Zach Anderson, and this one actually might well be one that you might know a little bit more than I do about. Zach is asking, is there anything different about the Corvette Racing entry that's coming for the Shanghai 6 Hours. We've got one of the C7Rs in for the Shanghai 6 Hours. This time versus the 2013 outing they made with a one-off at that stage at COTA. Is GM finally taking a serious look at the WEC, or do they just have a few extra dollars this year? You know anything about that one, MP?
Everything that I understand about this, Graham and Zach, is more on market value and just looking at how China in general has become such a huge and vastly important portion of GM's sales division. It just doesn't surprise me that they are using this race to try and build the brand on the Corvette side and just the general high-performance angle of what they do through the event. If there are other bigger WEC plans attached to it, I'm not aware of them. Not saying that they don't exist, just saying I have no knowledge of that being an intent. But, yeah, the only thing I've heard is, hey, this makes a lot of sense for us to do because it helps the company even more.
Absolutely. I mean, the other thing, by the way, I do know that there is another one-off, if like a two-off, that is under consideration. Whether or not we do see something coming to bear where a Corvette we might see Corvettes doing a double program with a car at Sebring for the WEC race as well as the 12 hours remains to be seen, decided and announced, or announced. But I think that one is in the melting pot as well for whatever other reason. But would it be good to see Corvette come to the WEC? Of course it would. There is a reality, though. At the moment, the Corvette is not a world car. And much as, you know, the likes of you and I, MP, and I'm sure lots of the listeners would love to see that happening, at the moment that has not been one of their marketing priorities for the brand.
Let's see. Let's go to Matthew Hawkins. So with the report you put out, Graham, about hypercar regs, which driver should we expect to be in this? Will there be the current crop, Nakajima, Buemi, Lauderer, etc., or should we see new drivers coming through? I might almost be able to answer this one, Matthew. I don't know. We haven't had anybody, any manufacturer that I know of, commit full scale, no matter what's coming, we're in. So I would say that's something that that's a few steps removed from being able to answer. Would I expect whomever is involved, hopefully Toyota, but would I expect any manufacturers involved to ring Kaz Nakajima, Seb Buemi, Andre Lauderer, and all of the current top P1 pilots, provided they're available, provided they're not off in Formula Series or doing other things, or IMSA, or who knows. Yes, I would think top talent will always be highly recruited. We also, Graham, don't know, for example, who might be available from, say, the Ford Chip Ganassi program, the GT program, right? In theory, there could be a number of monsters available from that if that program does not continue forward or get an extension, I should say, beyond 2019. So, yeah, I mean, there's lots of great questions about who might drive what, Matthew, but I would say we always come back to a rather normal default of the fastest, most high-profile drivers tend to be the ones that the manufacturers go after first and foremost. And there are a couple surprises at times, maybe a young driver, maybe even an older lion being brought back. But yeah, I wouldn't expect anything vastly different from what you have seen here. I'm going to go to Mike Kristoff, and I love submissions like this because we can get into all the minutia of EOT and blah, blah, blah. And then we have Mike, who says, I have the most basic of questions. What does the E in GTE stand for?
It's excellence. It's excellence. It's GT excellence. No, it's not.
No.
It's endurance. Is the simple answer. It's GT endurance, and that was the moniker chosen by the ACO for their version of what in the US is known as GTLM, which is what's LM stand for?
Llamas.
Lots of money. GT, lots of money.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Endurance, llama mating. No, I'm not sure. That's really and truly Hope not. Let's see. Here's one, Nick Wade. Hey, guys, with all the talk about how big the gap is between hybrids and privateers in the WEC, would DRS be a good option? Surely would help with traffic, especially as the privateers struggle more for pace than in race conditions. I assume Nick might be referring to the LMP1 hybrids. Can't say for sure, though, but...
I think it's actually the opposite. I think he's talking about whether or not this might be something that helps the privateers. The problem with tech like this is it costs money. And there's a second problem with tech like this is I think anything aerodynamic and anything radical, and particularly something that's not been tried before, and particularly at Le Mans, makes the rule makers very nervous. We've, oddly enough, just been talking, just a few minutes ago about the Mercedes CLR. Make no mistake, in the aftermath of the tragic accident that befell Alan Simonson, they felt, and I think they were right, that the future of the freedom they have with the Great Race was on something of a knife edge. That's why a very large amount of money indeed was spent on safety improvements to the Circuit de la Sarthe. And I think in the case of something like Active Aero, it's come and it's gone. It's come back again. This is a second question this week with it. It clearly could offer a solution of effectively pretty cheap performance at Le Mans, or anyway, you need something particularly in a straight line. But I've not yet seen anybody come forward and make the argument in a way that it's a kind of red line argument that we must have this, without which we cannot and will not go forward. Could this come forward as a potential solution for next year? It's a little bit tight on time, isn't it, for cars that are still, as another questioner just a few minutes ago said, are still in the first flush of development. I genuinely cannot see this coming forward anytime very soon. And by very soon, I mean after the next set of regulations in the middle part of the next decade.
You are listening to The Week in Sports Cars on the Marshall Pruett podcast, presented by Cooper Tires. My dear friend and colleague, Graham Goodwin of DailySportsCar.com. Let's go to our final ELMS and WEC question before jumping into Asian lesbian mans. This comes in from Robert Piley Jr. Condolences on the recent loss of your father, Robert. Robert asks, why doesn't the FIA run GT3 cars in place of GTE Pro at Le Mans and ELMS races? I'm also wondering if we answered this last week or not, but if we did, I apologize. We'll answer it again. If we didn't, then regardless. Completely different organizations, Robert. The FIA does not own the GT3 formula, did not create the GT3 formula. That's owned by the Stefan Rattel organization. The ACO/FIA have their GT Endurance formula, both Pro and AM, and that is what they own. So to answer your question very succinctly, two completely different and competing organizations. It's why when you head to an SRO Blancpain event, you don't see GTE/GTLM cars there, because they ain't theirs. It's a different formula, different mindset, and to give the super quick answer as to what makes them different, the GTE Pro/GT Le Mans formula is one that is very strict, very specific, cars built from the ground up by manufacturers to compete in those classes. They are taken from the production line, used with very specific guidelines that they've developed, often with the ACO or FIA, but these are cars that are built from the outset to conform to this formula. GT3 the exact opposite. You have cars that are taken from the production line without intent for them being GT3 cars. Work with the SRO. The SRO basically says, hey, we will more or less come up with something that works for any model you want to bring in, but I don't want to say make it up as we go, Graham, because that would be portraying things being looser than they are, but one is really from production line to track, following specific guidelines the whole way. The other one is, hey, your car's a little bit bigger, we'll come up with something. Hey, your car is a little smaller, lighter, lower powered, we'll boost it up a little bit. It's a little bit more of a run what you brung mindset. And so that's why the two cars don't necessarily fit.
It's traditionally been a really tough one to explain the difference, and I'm trying to recall exactly what it was. There was somebody far more technically minded than I am came up with one of those beautiful encapsulations of it, which is, you're quite right, GTE defined by that tight set of regulations. GT3 relies absolutely entirely on balance of performance, which means the advantage is that you can fit a lot wider an array of machinery into what is a not dissimilarly performing class to GTE. What is possibly well worth people looking at is a piece I wrote on the back of a conversation in Fuji about the brand new Aston Martin Vantage. That's in common with the Ferrari 488, is the same platform between the GT3 and the GTE versions of the car, and I think we might see more of that coming forward as manufacturers get to develop their next platforms. You can, in some circumstances, with a smart design team, get pretty darn close. In the case of the Aston Martin, to convert one from the other to the other, which you can do, means a change of engine. I gather it's just change of engine mapping for the Ferrari. It means switching off the ABS from the GT3 because GTE has no ABS. It means a new fuel tank because that's a different specification as well, and it means some different bodywork. That can be done by 5 skilled men in 5 hours in the case of the Aston Martin. Don't know what the similar thing is for the Ferrari. They are the only 2 cars at the moment that is even possible for. It is something that regulators and manufacturers have looked to do in the past, but I'm afraid one of the reasons why it's not happened is there are just too many. Well, I would put unenlightened self-interest involved here. There are clearly commercial reasons why some people would like that not to happen, and there's some commercial reasons why they would like it to happen. Don't see it happening anytime immediately soon.
We're going to go to Adam Bowman on the Asian Le Mans Series side. Says, I have 2 short questions about the AsLMS. That's lowercase s in the first.
Absolutely.
Usage. How much longer is the grandfather period for older spec LMP2 cars, ?
Okay.
And how come the AsLMS doesn't venture to Australia for a race?
Well, I can tell you that. And actually, the next questioner, which is Ruslar from our Reddit followers, thank you very much again, guys, for supporting us. Will Asian Le Mans Series ever switch to the current LMP2 spec? And if so, when? Well, the answer is this was all done to actually attract local entries from Asia with a lower entry point for LMP2. So absolutely correct. At the moment, the Asia Le Mans Series still uses effectively the 2016 spec cars, different tubs for the most part, Nissan or Judd V8 engines. So you're talking here Orica 05s, potentially the SMP BR01 car, but the predominant chassis this coming season will again be the Ligier JSP2. The answer is at the moment the commitment is to bring in the new cars from 2019-20, so in other words next season, so we've got a full season still to come with the old cars. I think the reality is here that they'll look and see what the customers are telling them. The restricting factor for the Asian Le Mans Series is the availability of raceable cars. There are remarkably few Orica 05s, the previous iteration, pre-Gibson engine cars, still in existence. A couple of significant race winners, I believe the Alpine that actually won Le Mans, the KCMG 05 that won Le Mans, a few damaged cars, and Jackie Chan DC Racing, who have got 1, possibly 2 cars available to them that they had built specifically last year to 2016 specification. As far as the JSP2s are concerned, there's something just over half a dozen of those cars still available to race, including 1 or 2 that would require work to get them to that point. So where we are at the moment for Asian Le Mans Series, which is 8 or 9 cars, I think is broadly all you're going to get there without serious money being spent by a team in putting a chassis back into use that hasn't been used for some little time. So 2019-20 is when the current intention is. I think they'll take a pragmatic choice based on what their take-up might be from teams that decide they want to come out to play in Asia for next season. So, is that done? No, and neither should it be. If they believe they're going to get a better grid by sticking with what they've got or by finding perhaps a two-class system, I'm sure they'll make a sensible choice. They are remarkably sensible people running the AsLMS series. As for Australia, you'll be aware, I'm sure, that there's a forthcoming intention to mount an Australian LMP3 championship. They've just signed a contract with Michelin to put the tyres on those cars. They've told us that they've reached the minimum level of commitment from teams to allow that championship to happen. Perhaps tellingly, they haven't told us what that minimum level actually is, which gets my spider senses tingling a little bit. I wish them well. I think it would be a great addition to Australian motorsport. Why aren't the AsLMS series going there at the moment? The answer is logistics. The way in which the freighting works in the Asia-Pacific region is that you have to do it by sea. Air travel, or rather air freight over those distances would make the logistics extremely expensive for a series that is putting a great deal of effort into keeping costs to a minimum. Might there be an opportunity to do that in the future? I hope so. And I know there's a number of people involved in the AsLMS series and its family hope so too, because I think that would be a stellar addition. I'd love to come racing with prototypes, a mixed prototype and GT grid in the fair country of Australia. Love all the racing I've done there, and I know you do too, MP.
I do. I'm sad. I want to go back and race some more and play there. Let's see. So we are down to general questions. We have IMSA left as well. Which direction should we go? Should we do more direct race stuff, or should we have some general fun and then why don't we do that? Let's do general and then close on IMSA. How does that sound?
Okay, that works for me.
All right. Gonna go with Brandon Yarmark, who says, who has the final say on what model an OEM runs as a GT race car? Is it the marketing department? Curious why the Vantage was chosen over the DB11. I'd say you're spot on here, Brandon. I mean, granted, you could also have a CEO of the company, depending on the size, get involved in what they want to use in competition. Usually there's two quick things that they're looking at. One is brand identity and amplification. What's going to help us look the best, grow our awareness in the marketplace, etc. And then the other one is, do we have something to sell? Is the Vantage in this example something that they're wanting to build 5 or 10 of, or however many, and try and get folks to purchase them? So, DB, if we're looking at something as awesome as a DB11, I'd love to see it. That would be great. But yeah, if I'm making a similar decision, I'm going to go with a Vantage, something that is more of a high volume performance car that in theory we would be able to sell more of those than a DB11. So if it was something big, Graham, like a hypercar or a DPI or something, maybe you'd go the DB11-ish type route because it's more of a halo car, fantasy car. But if we're talking GT stuff, it's more often than not going to be something that's relatable, Brandon.
I'm pretty sure, by the way, with the original Vantage, because all Aston Martin race cars are now on the Vantage platform, I'm pretty sure that in the first instance, when they moved from the DB9 based GT3 platform to the Vantage GT platform, there was also a consideration about wheelbase for that car, as I recall. And it's a while ago now, and I'm trying to rack my brains and think exactly when I heard that, was told that. But there was that consideration too. But you're absolutely right, Marshall. It does come down to two things: what fits the regulations, and two, what's the most appropriate platform for the lifespan of the race car you are designing. Because remember, it might be the biggest, Chinese thing, but if that's got a limited production run, it's not really selling the brand terribly much if you're still racing it or having it raced 3 or 4 years after the thing is out of production. So those things need to be taken into account as well. So a quick look at Alex Eichmiller's question. Whilst watching football, I'm not quite sure whether or not that's football or proper football on Sunday, I was reflecting on how different the environment is at sports car races versus other large events, football, baseball, soccer, concerts. So that's football, baseball, football, concerts, etc. In other events, there's often a heavy police presence, rowdy attendees. While you do get some racing fans that have had a bit too much to drink, it still seems to be a friendly and inviting environment. Do you guys share the same opinion? If so, what is it you think that makes sports car racing different? MP, what do you think?
No, that one's all you. That one's all you. You're the rowdy one.
Well, look, I mean, stick and ball sports. I'm actually, as I stand here right now, and you'll have a bit of a laugh at this. I'm looking through into the lounge area of our Bijou residence here, as Stephen Kilby rapidly catches up with trying to see whether or not his beloved Dodgers managed to dodge the bullets in the World Series, because he's actually playing catch-up.
They did not, by the way, which is so awesome. Yeah. As a Northern Californian, watching the Dodgers lose is just, there's nothing better.
He'll be delighted that he can't hear what you're telling me because it's on headphones. But the key here is, I just think it's a little bit more tribal. I used to be watch a bit of football, but I used to follow my local rugby team, my local rugby league team, which is a different game from rugby union. If you come from the civilised part of the world, you'll understand that. That's the north of England. Anyone else outside that is going to start to wonder what on earth I'm babbling on about. And even there, where it was a pretty family environment and, actually a reasonably, homespun game, you would still get some elements in the crowd that were not perhaps the most pleasant and family friendly. You're right, sports car audiences, for the most part, very many racing audiences, but not all, tend to be a little bit more subdued, a little bit more perhaps respectful and cultured about these things. Why? I don't know, is the honest answer. There's not a kind of Alan McNish barmy army that I'm aware of. You'll get a few excessive behaviours at the Le Mans 24 Hours, quite a lot of excessive behaviour at the Le Mans 24 Hours, in the same way as perhaps you do at the Bathurst 1000 or other major events. And certainly at Formula One, we've seen some actually fairly unpleasant behaviour in the past, booing, drivers on podiums, etc., etc. I just don't like to see that. I mean, I like to be partisan in some of the sports where that's appropriate for me in my chosen profession to be, but not to the point where it's outwardly disrespectful to other competitors. It's great to see when sport can be sporting. I'll defer to a description my good lady wife actually gives, which is, when you watch rugby union, the level of respect for the officials, for the referee, is outstanding. When you've got these teeny tiny guys refereeing these monsters, 9'3" wide and about 15'3" tall, with broken nose and 2 cauliflower ears, and looking like they've actually been in the world's biggest bar brawl, being told off by the referee, taking that, being respectful of that, and complying. I think that's a great thing. I hope it doesn't change. For the most part, I'd say 95% of the time that I've spent my time in sports car racing paddocks, the vast majority of the audience have been massively respectful.
Yeah, the only real fun I would throw in quickly is maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago at Petit Le Mans. Oh, no, it wasn't. Oh, no, what year was it? 3 years ago? 2015. When it was shortened a wee bit because of rain, I believe. We had a very drunken, belligerent, quote, fan walk into the media center during post-race press conference, and because there was no quality control and no one manning the door or womaning the door to make sure that only credentialed people got in. And because there was no effort made to actually check and see if the person raising their hand to ask a question to grab the mic was recognizable or had a media credential or anything that would say that they were a member of the press corps, some guy was given the microphone and I believe started asking some fairly obnoxious questions about apologies. Should there be apologies to the fans for stopping the race short? And it only took about 30 seconds to realize that this was just some drunk idiot who was given the microphone and shouldn't have been. So in terms of big fist fights or other things trackside, I can't think of much. But that was a good one that stands out.
Well, I mean, here's oddly enough, because he clearly was listening, Stephen Kilby's just come and passed me a note, and it's a very good interjection on this one, which is unusual for Stephen, because what he says is, when you get to a big stick and ball game, there are two teams and two very large sets of fans at opposing sides in that interaction. When you come to a sports car race, there's 20 or 30 teams, lots of drivers and subsets within that. So actually, the partisanship is rather more diluted. I'd like to think it's a bit more than that, but it's a very good point that he makes. If you want to see what partisanship can actually do when you get into two opposing teams, let's mention politics and move on from there.
And tell him the Dodgers suck, by the way, if you can. We just want to reaffirm the fact.
I can't tell him the result because he will get very, 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 very angry if I tell him.
I can mention that my favorite is not really a favorite, but one of my favorite memories of bizarre hostility that wasn't necessarily team-based at a stick and ball sporting event was at a San Francisco Giants game at the old, hated yet beloved Candlestick Park. It was one of the, I believe it was Major League Baseball's first wind tunnel. I must have been 7 years old, 6 or 7, so this would have been the mid to late 70s, and I think we were sitting either in the second deck, first deck, whatever it was, someone on either the second or third deck above, back when you could do such things, grabbed the large mustard dispenser that had the little handle and pump on the top. I mean, and this thing is a small of like a size of a small keg of beer. Someone basically, I'm guessing they were drunk, maybe just feeling mischievous, grabbed the whole thing, walked up to the edge of whatever that was, the second or third deck, unscrewed the top, and just turned the thing upside down. And so I happened to be there with my grandfather and looked over to the left, and I just saw this cascading sheet of yellow. And it's one of those things that's hilarious when it's not you, but scars you for life if it is you. Thankfully, it wasn't us, and thankfully we were just barely far enough away for it to not be us. But we saw, it must have been 3 or 4 people just get soaked. It was like with a cartoon with mustard. And then, of course, it exploded and splashed everywhere. So, yeah, it was a mustard bomb. At least a gallon and a half of mustard. That was... I've seen fights. I've had to almost get into fights with belligerent people. So, I mean, look, it's viewing stick and ball sports, it's almost a contact experience for fans. So, let's see. Where shall we wander next, my friend? Shay Adam. Was fortunate to see Shay and give her a hug on Friday. Shay says, we rarely get to stay geographically close to the racetrack we're working on any given weekend. For example, we're about 5 minutes from the track at Sebring, but closer to an hour from Lime Rock. What track do each of you enjoy most, to the point to where the drive at the start and the end of the day balances out? Minimum drive time, 30 minutes, let's say. What's been a real corker for you?
Well, to be honest with you, here we are in Algarve. It's actually, we've got an unusual day off for various reasons, logistical reasons and reasons of actually just recharging. This morning, We popped back to the track to actually see some post-season testing and a couple of new cars out, a couple of new LMP2 efforts for their first runs at the circuits, the Algarve International Circuit today. And genuinely, that was the first time in 5 days here that we'd actually seen that drive in daylight. We arrived in the dark, we were leaving before dawn, we're getting back late at night, and we hadn't seen the countryside. It is beautiful. It is absolutely fantastic. For me, my favourite drive to and from a track, probably on the planet of late, was my first trip this year to Watkins Glen. Pure Americana, absolutely fantastic area. Have never seen it before. Hope to be able to get to go and see that again. Really nice drive in an area I'd not seen before that I thought was absolutely charming.
Funny you should mention that. I really do not like the vast majority of the drive to Watkins Glen. And it's because so much of it is under extreme speed restriction. It is very slow, needlessly slow. I'm not saying we should be doing 400 miles an hour, but just some areas that are pointless at 35 miles an hour. How do I know that there's heavy speed control there? I might have had one of the local constables pull me over for an invitation to discuss my apparent disregard for the posted speed limitations. But yeah, that one I don't enjoy just because you end up sitting there going, okay, this is artificial. What I do love is the drive, the non-artificial drive from the hotel, usually in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, out to Elkhart Lake, to the Road America circuit. For reasons I can't fully explain, starting a couple years ago, it became the I listen to nothing but the band Mastodon on the drive in and drive out. And it's great. It's just whenever I think of covering an event at Road America, it involves the band Mastodon, a really enjoyable drive. And this year I got lucky on that front too. The constable meeting, I was blasting up the hill, I think for the IndyCar event, because the IndyCar event there comes before the IMSA event. Was blasting up over a hill, saw what I thought was a police officer ahead, not hidden, but at a vantage point to where they would catch you sneakily if you were speeding. And I was fortunate to have someone, I think I was doing about 85 American miles per hour, and had someone behind me somewhat close doing roughly the same 85 miles an hour. I saw that police officer. We zipped by him or her fairly quickly, but I did at least make a point to lift and try and slow down so it wasn't so obnoxious while going by. And the minute that myself and the person driving behind me went past the police officer, saw the person come off of that little perch, hit the lights on top of their cruiser, and come flying after us. And I was sweating a few bullets there, Graham, and I was also starting to laugh when I noted that the officer grabbed the person behind me. So I'm not always so fortunate, but I think the last speeding ticket I received would have been maybe 12 hours of Sebring in something like 2008 or 9 with Sam Collins, Wouter Melson from Ultimate Car Page, and maybe one other monkey in the car with us. So, But yeah, it's been a while.
Hashtag blame Sam. Sam. For me, the last time I was pulled by a cop was in the United States, and I'm genuinely not kidding. I was actually pulled over for doing 5 miles an hour in a 3 miles an hour zone. Listen, I was driving a Nissan 370Z Nismo on an epic road trip from Los Angeles up through Vegas up to Utah for the Miller Motorsports Park, then out to Bonneville for the Salt Flats and Speed Weeks, and then back via Salt Lake City, and then down through a fantastic drive down to and via Midland in Texas, the Chaparral Gallery, massive. Plus that one was to COTA for the WEC event. And I can't remember exactly where we were, but the road was effectively out, and there were 3 mile per hour limits posted. Came round a hairpin bend with a forest ranger going the other way, and turned around his SUV, pulled us over, and Didn't get a ticket, but got a warning for 5 miles an hour in a 3 mile per hour zone.
You heathen.
Absolutely.
Heathen. All right, my friend, we're roughly an hour-ish into this episode. We're going to do our best to hit the throttle a little bit and be done here in the next half hour or so. Let me see, what general fun shall we grab next? Mike Hogg. Hey, Marshall, as a keen photographer yourself, what do you think about the tabard-wearing buffoon who invaded the track at Laguna Seca? Ever seen anything like that before? The answer is yes. I believe it was also an SRO-based event. We've had a couple of those in recent years, right, Graham?
We had one at the WEC, which was a guy rode his bike onto one of the access roads beyond the barrier and then was shooting with the cars coming from behind him. So was not looking basically at the angle of attack at all. That brought a red flag out. That person will not be attending any races at the Nürburgring or ACO sanctioned races ever, I think it's fair to say. It's idiotic, absolutely idiotic. Saw the pictures. Frankly, I'd have the person flogged.
So during the 8 hour between turns 3 and turns 4 at WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca, we had a photographer who decided that standing behind the barrier, insufficient. Only amateurs would do such things. So therefore, being an exceptional pro, she decided to venture out into the kiddie litter about halfway between the barrier and trackside. Having shot at that same exact place, there's a gate that you can come out right there, or you can enter closer to turn 3 and walk down, and the barrier does end. It does not seal off and wall off access to the track. So if you wanted to, you could indeed walk out onto the track or walk out into the gravel pit there. As this ace photographer did so, reached out to a friend at the track to try and get a little bit more information, and was told, yes, first-time shooter here, and was a media guest of one of the companies. Company not mentioned and person's name not mentioned. She did attend the photo briefing where safety is stressed beyond question. As soon as she was spotted, she was taken off, reprimanded, taken to the steward's room where the race director chewed her out. Her vest and credential were immediately revoked. First time I've ever seen that, said a representative from the track. So yes, maybe we're at fault for this, Graham. Maybe we played up the high quality of the Circuit Safari offering at the WEC at the Fuji Japan round, where media members and others can load onto buses that drive around the track for a limited period while the cars are going at essentially full chat to be up close. And so maybe someone listened to our podcast and said, again, amateurs in a bus. I'm just actually going to venture out and do kind of old school. And, frankly, if this were 40 years ago, Graham, 50, 60 years ago, she probably would not have been reprimanded, because walking up within inches of the apex of a corner or whatever else was kind of the norm. It was, using photographers as either berms, curbing, or something to slow yourself if need be. So, yeah, but again, maybe it's our fault.
Well, I can remember a tale from, I'm pretty sure it was Autosport's legendary Jeff Bloxham, being told off by one of the guys in a pretty major race that he'd caused the accident. Now, not in the same way as this half-wit, could easily have ended her life and, frankly, made everybody else in professional photography's life far worse. But because he caused the accident, because Jeff was standing at a particular turn, a particular place, and was being used as a braking marker by... Can you see where this is going? And, of course, what he then did, as photographers tend to do, was he moved just a little. And you can fill in the gaps, but there you go. Half-wittery of the most extreme variety, young lady. Hope never to see you at a racetrack again.
Oh, Lord. Let's see. This one comes in from 4SGTE. Same question as the last time. Why do we need prototypes? Why couldn't we have Class 1 GT silhouettes as a top category in WEC and IMSA? Performance levels will be similar to what is proposed. The 2020 car in Class 1 could have the same level of technology development, including the hybrid systems, while having a silhouette of a road car. Why do we need prototypes? Because people like them, because people want them. One of the things I try and remember is just because I don't like something doesn't mean it shouldn't exist. It doesn't mean that other people don't like such a thing. So obviously if Acura, Mazda, Nissan through ESM, and Cadillac decided they did not like prototypes, they could go run other things, or they could push IMSA to make changes. And if we were to look at the ACO side, I know obviously we're on a significant downturn on factory prototypes there, but Audi, Porsche, Nissan, Toyota, Peugeot in recent years all opted in for big factory prototype deals because they see value in it. And we even have privateers who are involved and love them. In non-hybrid form, we have LMP2 as well. We have LMP3. The reality is prototypes have been part of racing forever, more or less. They might not have been formally called prototypes, but the concept of something that is a little space age-ish, future-based, even if we're talking 20s, 30s, 40s, whatever era, I'll have to admit, it's not the question doesn't frustrate me. We get this, I hear it from time to time on a regular basis and don't quite understand it, because while one might not like prototypes, there are many people who do, and obviously with prototypes tending to be the fastest cars in any endurance racing series, in particular, Graham, plus more often than not the headliners that bring out the biggest fans. We've seen that over time. We need prototypes because GT-only series tend to not bring out lots and lots and lots of people.
It's fair enough, and oddly enough, it knits neatly into a question just above in the list we've got here from Behind the Burner 32, another of the Redditors. Hello again. What would it take for Class 1 to hit the jackpot relative to IMSA and WEC viewership? Super GT gets decent views on Nesmo TV. DTM is hanging on in there. Do you think this momentum will carry over come 2019? It's another point about little toy cars. You can, by the way, because the question comes in about 1/64th kind of Hot Wheel size Super GT cars. They are out there. I've got a few of them. Let me say this. I completely understand why a particular set of regulations would take your imagination. Class 1 does not yet exist as a racing category. The first cars are out there in testing now. It is a completely unproven concept at the moment, in exactly the same way as car is an unproven concept, in the same way that DPI was an unproven concept, little over a year ago. The reality here is that DTM has failed in its current iteration. They are having to scrub around for other options, hence the Aston Martin program that's coming forward for other commercial reasons for other commercial parties. Super GT, you're absolutely right, is a source of enthusiasm and fascination to a lot of fans of those brands and of sports car racing, but is not a global phenomenon. We are talking here about, if we're talking about prototypes, of a classification of cars that the sanctioning body and manufacturers and professional teams wants to take to a global level. They are in a better position to be able to judge whether or not their marketeers and their followers and etc. want that than I am, and possibly that you are. I think Class 1, I get it, I can see the appeal, but make no mistake, that is a throw the dice from two series for two different reasons. In the case of the Super GT side of things and the Japanese manufacturers, they'd like it to be rather more global product than it currently is. In the case of the DTM, frankly, they're looking to breathe life into a formula that at the moment, and there's no easy way to say this, is dying on its arse. So, what we shouldn't get into here is a debate whether or not this should be the next fantastic world championship. We need to see whether or not this actually succeeds in saving the DTM and in enabling Super GT to deliver on a couple of its aspirations to expand their horizons beyond the home market. These are two domestic championships, not major international or global championships, and Class 1 needs to prove itself before we see this as being the grand messiah of motorsport.
I'm going to grab a couple and provide some quick answers here in the general, and I apologize for those that I'm skipping. I'll admit some of them are fun. I'm just not in the right mindset right now to go in that direction. Michael Bredick says that we've got a BOP one, which is great. We haven't really touched on BOP yet today. GT3 cars race in many series. Did the SRO, FIA, IMSA, ACO, Super GT, and GT300, ADAC, GT Masters work together and use the data of each other to get BOP as good as they can get, or do they all go their own way with BOP? I think in a very general sense, Michael, we have, call it baseline establishment of GT3 coming into each season, especially if we have new models. I would say that is the starting point for all series or most series, but as we see, IMSA is going to change BOP in their GT Daytona class as necessary, World Challenge, this, that, the other. I would say that, with that format being used globally in many places, while sanctioning is needed, actual formal sanctioning is needed to use cars under that regulation, for the most part, championships end up doing their own thing as needed. And there you go. I'm going to go to David Simmons next. Asks, what has led to the resurgence in sports cars of late? For a while I thought of the series as an afterglow, but now it seems to have gained some steam. I would say in a very general sense, David, I would attribute that to two things. One, cost controls has really become an accepted part of everything. There's a lot of work being put into many championships today to make things cheaper, arguably maybe less adventurous and fun. No, not as much crazy, wacky, oh my gosh, what is that vehicle and how did they come up with 1 million horsepower or whatever it is. I'd say things have been dumbed down a little bit, costs have come down and or been controlled a little bit better. I'd also say, David, the proliferation of readily available call-and-order turnkey type vehicles, whether it is an LMP3 car, a GT4 car, in many cases, forming a sports car team or deciding to go sports car racing for pretty much ever was something where there had to be a lot of intimate knowledge. You had to have a lot of old crusty beards that knew all the ins and outs of the sport to build cars. Very specialized for the most part. And I would say just in recent years, especially in the last 2 or 3, even some of the smaller kind of training categories, Graham, like IMSA's previous Continental Tire Series, now the Michelin Tire Series, something where we've gone from a lot of these home-built touring car type platforms to, nope, it's either a TCR, a GT3, a GT4, just off-the-shelf customer type thing. So I think it's
LMP3s. Yep.
A lot easier for the average person to say, I either want to buy something and go do it, or step into something that is a well-known, highly quantified, highly developed thing, so I have an equal chance of being successful. So I think that between those two, I think that's why we've seen sports cars on a bit of an uptick, and I would say it's maybe more on the car count side than true TV ratings or whatever, popularity metrics. I wouldn't say are off the chart by any means, but we've definitely not seen sparse grids in most instances,
which is a great thing. It is a great thing to actually see that emerging, that we are getting. I mean, my kind of issue here is I think we've got too many different series across marketplaces that are really not quite mature enough to support as many as we've now got, and a preponderance of series into, for instance, the North American market at the moment, which remains to be seen whether that can be a success. Let me just tick off a couple here. Right Turn Lover asks, has a team already secured, newly crowned indeed, European Le Mans Series title winner Andrea Pizzitola's service for the Asian Le Mans Series? The answer is yes, they have. There'll be an announcement of that in the coming days. Also, we've got Lars asking, sad to see Nico Lapierre leave Dragon Speed in the ELMS. That is because Nico is just 3 times Le Mans winning LMP2 driver. Nico Lapierre is going to join the new Cool Racing LMP2 efforts. Any ideas for suitable available replacements? Lots. There are lots of very talented guys that would love to get into a competitive LMP2 seat, and there were plenty of them sniffing around those seats today at the Algarve International Circuit. I'll answer this one. I know asking whether or not if you were a race car, which one would you be? There's no doubt in my mind, by the way, gentlemen and ladies listening, Marshall Pruett would be a Porsche 91730. No doubt whatsoever that would be the Marshall Pruett race car.
Are you sure not a big old blaring Ford GT40 or something like that?
Maybe a 91730 with a Ford GT V8 in the back.
There we go. Well, let me grab two final general questions, then we will move to IMSA and close there. Our pal Jerry Sudeth says, is there a current car that you guys think will attain legendary status of, say, the Ford GT40 or the Porsche 962? I would say, and this is dipping back into the last decade, I think the Audi R8 will be
100%.
viewed as one of those legends. I mean, the 919 hybrid from Porsche, I think will be looked at as a world beater. It's relatively short lifespan. I mean, granted, the GT40 project didn't run forever, but I think that will be looked at in a similar vein.
I consider the same, and I wonder how history will view the, if you like, the retirement tribute tour of the 919. I hope it views it well. I think it's a stunning example of what you can do with marketing, what is not your chosen racing product for a season. But I completely agree with you about the Audi R8. I wonder, actually, whether or not history will regard the Audi R10 more kindly than perhaps the car was regarded in its pomp as being a groundbreaking race car. But certainly the R8, absolutely. The 919, I think, is absolutely the other one that I might put up there. Interestingly, I looked through the GT cars available in the last couple of decades, and whilst there are some stunningly beautiful cars and some actually quite successful cars, I sort of don't quite see any of them at the moment as being anywhere close to the kind of impact that the GT40 made, including the current Ford GT.
Yeah, and it's also worth noting that while today some might look back at the Ford GT40 and think of that as a GT car, and I realize GT is even in the name, that was a prototype. I mean, that was a prototype then. So even today's Ford GT, whatever physical, visual similarity, numerical name similarity, today's is a GT car. What won famously in the 60s, that was a prototype. If I'm thinking of GT cars today, mind you, tenure is certainly a big part of answering this question, right, Graham? Because, hey, we won for 3 years and then changed to a new model. I don't know. I think that destabilizes any claims that could be made. But I would look at the Corvette C6R, possibly today's Corvette C7R, knowing all of the wins and success between both models at Le Mans, in the American Le Mans Series, in IMSA, big races, 24 Hours of Daytona, Sebring, blah, blah, blah. Championships won. I mean, knowing that Corvette tends to have a model and then have it go for 5, 6, 7 years, however many, quite a long stretch, I think that argument might become a little bit easier on that end. So let's see. I'm going to go with one more general, then we'll go to IMSA. Brian McCoy, I've noticed with every in-car I've watched in my lifetime, there's always a map of whatever respective track that's being raced on somewhere within the driver's sight line. Obviously, professional racing drivers aren't forgetting where they are going on the track. So what is this used for primarily? I would say that it varies from team. As someone who has covered motor racing, worked in motor racing for a really long time, Brian, and has been to a lot of tracks, and in theory knows all the corners. I don't remember all the turn numbers at a lot of places that I go, even if I've been there 10 times, 20 times. It's just, I know all the corners, but attaching an actual number to some of them, for whatever reason in my brain, hasn't always been a thing. So I would say that if we keep in mind that for a lot of drivers who maybe are coming in new or haven't been there for a year, whatever it is, I know that I would be putting a little map on there that has the corners on it, so that primarily it's not a case of I've forgotten where I am, but more of Relay item. Hey, I have considerable, pick the handling dynamic, oversteer, understeer, brake locking, whatever, in turn 3. I would also say that it is sometimes just simply helpful to be able to look if someone tells you, hey, there's a crash in turn 7, you need to slow down and move to the left or right, and that's a couple corners up. Would I rather have a driver who has a map in front of them, or if there was any question, they could look and go, turn 7, got it, it's the left, or it's a left-hander before the chicane? There's nothing bad about it, I would say. And then you also have, just from a spotter standpoint, since we have spotters now in a lot of places, where just being able to call out corners just makes things a little bit easier. Removing any questions for clarity has just become a much bigger part of motor racing in the modern era, Brian. So you don't want the driver going, okay, now where is that again? Then you also want to be able to say, hey, I just crashed. What? Yep, turn 5. All right, thanks.
There is also the other another aspect here, which is never underestimate the effects of adrenaline in terms of not just the ability to motivate, but the ability to confuse. Because if your life is moving at 150 miles an hour and all of a sudden it isn't, certainly you and I have both, I'm sure, Marshall, had kind of equal opportunity to speak to people overdosed with adrenaline, if you like, through the experience of racing. And if something did go wrong, actually just being able to, where that 150 mile an hour lifestyle has suddenly come to a grinding halt, to try to help them to work out where they are in the dark sometimes, can't hurt.
All right, I forgot that we have one World Challenge question here, which I will take and answer quickly, and I will admit that being there Friday, watching and feeling full SRO-ness in place with all the World Challenge familiar personnel there, and many of the teams there that are really working under SRO sanction from just race director and such as well. It was interesting, Graham. Very interesting. Some of the things that I heard were not very complimentary, but our pal Kevin Perez Frederico says, hey guys, since the demise of World Challenge's original mission of being a series for manufacturers, homegrown engineering and aftermarket companies could compete and turning into another, quote, soulless SRO organization that only caters to nothing but gentlemen drivers and help OEM manufacturers sell exclusive turn car keys only. My question is, will we ever see, or do you guys know if another series similar in spirit to the old World Challenge spirit would come back? I don't know of that happening in terms of there being a World Challenge replacement for what I'm mourning the loss of with World Challenge. I can tell you this. I listened to folks who are in the know and plugged into the World Challenge paddock on the entrant and driving side, unsolicited, mentioned to me that essentially, Graham, expressing the things you and I have said here many times recently on the subject of, I do not think the SRO fully understand what they've gotten themselves into, and that racing in America is not going to succeed for them if they try and apply the same European blueprint that has worked for them elsewhere in the world. We do things differently here. It's spoken of just by every driver that comes over from wherever for the first time. Hey, you guys do things a little differently. And a lot of what I heard last weekend at this first big pure SRO thing, not just a standard World Challenge round, but pure SRO. With World Challenge, there's a layer of infrastructure as well. Just heard from a number of people on my my day trip down there that, yeah, they don't get it. And I don't know if they're going to get it. There was one thing which was rankling a lot of people, Graham. There were just on-the-spot fines, $50 per kph for pit lane speed violations. And just out of nowhere. And by out of nowhere, I mean, no, hey, we showed that you were 3 kph over, talk with so-and-so, let's look at data, let's just see, did you do it? This is what we see, what do you see on your side? Let's have a conversation about it, an actual relationship being manifested here. Heard from a number of people saying, just bam, you owe us $350. What? Yes, you sped by 7 kph on pit lane, or pick whatever the number is. And just, again, I'm making no claims about whether the whomever sped by 3 or 7 or whatever. I'm making no claims as to whether they were right or wrong. Clearly, if they did it, they were wrong. The manner in which it's handled is where I kept, and this is just one example, but the manner in which it was handled is where I heard more than a few folks say, they just don't get it. That's not how we work here, and you're going to scare people off. And I heard more from other people on different subjects related to, I'm not really liking this vibe too much. I need to also mention quickly, Graham, I heard a few others that said, yeah, I quite like this. I think this is going to be a good thing. I think it's going to take off. So there's no right or wrong or consensus. Just I was surprised at the number of people who said, I don't think this is going to work. And I might be looking at another sports car series in America if it continues this way.
I'll add just this very brief thing, because that, oddly enough, runs completely counter to what I was hearing in the Blancpain paddock at Silverstone by one visit to a Blancpain GT race this past season, where a entrant of an ACO race series, also involved with an effort in Blancpain, was saying, actually, we have got people here working actively to make sure we don't get into trouble. So something's going wrong here, isn't there, between the two? Because that runs counter to what I was being told by somebody who has the bitter experience of running in a series where the FIA rulebook prevails, where fines are often levied and are heavy, that says that the Blancpain team there were working hand in glove with teams to make sure that they weren't getting into trouble. Well, somebody needs to actually make sure the rulebooks are applied evenly, don't they?
Indeed. So I need to jump over here very quickly and handle a flat tire on my dear wife's car. So luckily we only have a handful of IMSA questions this week. So nice for a change. Last week it was the vast majority. So don't mind the inversion here at all. I will grab here, and we'll go. I'll grab here. I'm not going to grab here. I'm going to grab Luke Philippone, who says maybe a moit. Boy, I'm having a real problem.
A moint poot.
First day with the new lips. It may be a moot point now that the prototype class will be split, but why did IMSA allow open damper development in DPI when this could not have been an option for LMP2? How great of an advantage did this give the DPI cars over the global LMP2s? Thanks for the show and keep up the good work. Well, of course, I screw up the part which would lead you to ever say good work, but that's fine, Luke. Thank you. Yes, we've mentioned a couple times that the absolute handling capabilities of the DPIs in some of the finer corners definitely stood out over the LMP2s. But the reality here, though, Luke, was this was the agreement coming in that IMSA would not alter, modify, or monkey with the FIA WEC LMP2, spec LMP2 cars, period. And that included dampers not being an open subject. So it's something that, even going back to race 1 with the combined DPIs and LMP2s at Daytona in January of 2017, the P2 teams were like, what the hell? There's so much we could do, but can't. And yeah, the reality was, it wasn't IMSA necessarily being mean or disliking them. That's just the agreement that they made. Granted, we did see that stray midpoint of this year, Graham, later in the IMSA season, where they decided to add some ballast and make some capacity changes because they had throttled back so heavily on the DPIs that the P2s were running roughshod over them, and so they decided to pull back a little bit on the LMP2s by modifying a bit there. But yeah, that's essentially the answer. DPI being a custom formula to America, they said, hey, this is going to be open, and that is something that they did. So will be interesting to see if this ever becomes open in IMSA on the damper side, knowing that we have kind of cracked the door open on that. We're not going to change anything. Okay, well, we're going to change a little something. So I know that the P2 teams would be asking for it. But then, as like most things, Graham, when you say, hey, let us play with something, there's then usually the, why did you let us play with this? We're spending way too much on it. So that's a bit of a normal life cycle. Let's see. Mr. B_66 says, working under the assumption that off-the-shelf Michelins are going to be faster than Contis, what will IMSA do to keep a safe speed differential to the GTLM cars? Simply cut their power output? Well, I assume you're referring to the prototypes here.
I think so.
Yeah, having covered this a little bit and speaking with Michelin, they're not using off-the-shelf Michelins. They're using their WEC P2 tires as the base that they're developing for IMSA. I'm not saying that they're making grand changes, but these are not true, just yanked out of inventory. I think for sure we're going to see faster prototypes with Michelins on them. I don't think it's going to be drastic or crazy. And in terms of a safe speed differential to the GTLM cars, I mean...
Yeah, they're used to it. They're used to it.
We go to Le Mans, we go to any WEC race, and we have LMP1 cars on the same track with GTLM. So safety to me, in terms of speed differential, not a real concern. Hey,
I'll add one bit of detail here, because we saw something significant over the weekend here in Portimao. The final iteration of control tyre being taken by Michelin for the end of the ELMS season, and it was a Michelin 1, 2, 3 in the final round. Dunlop will respond in the LMS, but I think that's effectively they've taken a big step forward, both in terms of pace, but in particular longevity of the tyre.
3 questions to go, Graham. Goodwin. Max Radke. Bo Barfield is typically described as a great voice in race control, but after this season in IMSA, I'm starting to worry. We saw way more contact and crash damage this year than I can remember in the past. Just an off year, or will bumper cars be the rule of the future? That's an interesting one, Max. I'm not one to hang poor driving on a race steward unless the race steward has been negligent in stating expectations. So if a Bo Barfield or a Kyle Novak in IndyCar or a pick whomever, wherever, basically just says, hey, today's the race, it's 6 hours long, try not to hit each other, see you later, that's maybe not doing what they should do. Knowing that there are some pretty strict guidelines as to what is and is not allowed, the driving professionalism that is expected, maybe I have a different recollection of the season, Max, and I'm not saying one's right or wrong, but I don't recall this year being super crashy. I don't recall thinking on too many occasions that Bo swallowed the proverbial whistle and didn't jump in. There were a couple where I thought, we talked about that right after Petit Le Mans, Graham, where the 4 wide on the front straight that did serious chassis damage to Turner Motorsports BMW M6 GT3 due to some unnecessary movement. I thought that might have been an opportunity to make a statement early in the race that this kind of over-aggressive behavior wasn't necessary. But I would say Bo has a pretty good grasp as for what should or shouldn't be allowed. I also know that IMSA does a pretty darn good job, in my opinion, of placing expectations within the driver ranks. But if I just go back to the Petit Le Mans crash, for example, this is all triggered by pro drivers. This is all triggered by some pretty amazing drivers, one being a multiple champion now, other frontline race winning, highly coveted driver. I mean, there's some serious talent in place, and they were the ones that triggered the whole thing. So, again, if this was just carnage and mayhem, then I would say, IMSA either needs to look at making a change in race control or sitting down its race director and saying, dude, you have to get these people under control, scare the bejesus out of them, whatever it is. It's no different than on pit lane, Graham. If we have a team that's constantly seeing their pit equipment go up in flames or wheels constantly falling off their car, you would expect IMSA to go over and say, okay, you're a problem child, and we are going to get this fixed or you're going to go away. I haven't seen any instances like that consistently, Max, honestly, to make me think that that was necessary, nor did it jump out to me that Bo was not doing his job. Now, granted, and as Bo knows, because we have these conversations, I will certainly tell him if I think that's the case. So I think in this instance, this one doesn't stand out to me as an actionable item. But I know that there was a parallel from last weekend, Mr. Goodwin, that jumps out for you.
Absolutely. In fact, just yesterday in the European Le Mans Series race, Eduardo Freitas, who is the race director not just for the WC but also for the LMS and the Asia Le Mans Series, an extraordinary number of penalties actually handed out, and in what was a fairly extraordinary race. But the one that stood out for me was the AVF by Adrian Valles, Dallara LMP2, which had led the race at one point in the hands of Enrique Chavez. That was handed over to his teammate, one Konstantin Terashenko, who then proceeded to pinball the Dallara around to near oblivion, and was welcomed in that endeavour after taking out not one but two LMP3 cars, one of which was in contention for the title. Was welcomed with the radio message from Eduardo Freitas that he had received a 2-minute stop and hold penalty, and Eduardo continued to explain that he was getting that penalty because, and I nearly quote because I can't immediately remember exactly the right words, this is not the first time that this driver has been guilty of this type of behaviour on track. So race directors have memories, and quite correct that they should do so. For me, it's all about consistency. You're absolutely right. It's about consistency in terms of the way the consistency in the way that in which the rules are both interpreted and indeed enforced during practice, qualifying, and the race. That, to my mind, is the true mark of a really effective race director.
All right, we're down to 2 questions, and I feel bad. I genuinely feel bad for our friend Travis Bender. Sent in this question 4 times. Travis writes, 4th time's the charm for 2019. We've already discussed the Hawk, Jack Hawksworth, and it should be future Hoenn prototypes. Any ideas of which team could be looking to secure his services? Been a huge fan of his for years, and it would be great seeing him fight for overall wins. Travis, of course, because he'd sent this in 3 times previously and we did not get to it, being a good steward and a good man, trying to help us out, making sure that we get to his question, sends it in a 4th time, knowing that we're recording on Monday. And then what do our friends at AIM Vassar Sullivan do? They announce Jack Hawksworth as their first confirmed driver of their Lexus RCF GT3 IMSA program, in which Travis then saw afterwards and was like, man, yeah, and rightfully so. So I feel bad, Travis. We should have gotten to this before. I was hoping, like many, like you, that I'm sure that Jack would end up in a prototype because he's just that fast and that good. Having spoken with James Sully Sullivan of the Vassar Sullivan team last week, he did mention that they were close to announcing their first driver, who had gone very quickly in the car previously, and that pretty much pointed to Jack, but he wasn't willing to name names, so wasn't a surprise to see Jack named this morning. But I apologize, Travis. I suck. Purely my fault. And does he still belong in prototypes? Of course. Also good to know that while jobs for young pros seem to be harder to get a hold of these days, even if it's a, quote, lowly GT car instead of a prototype or an Indy car where he belongs, I'm glad that Jack is employed, earning money for being really good at what he does. Last question, Graham. Very important here. I think we might all end at who's going to win the DPI championship next year in IMSA. This comes in from Travis Russell, who says, if Penske traded this year's black wheels for polished wheels, would a championship in 2019 be a given? I mean, it's kind of automatic, right? I mean, polished Penske wheels equals championships. I believe that is subchapter 4, section 14 in the sporting code.
I know for a fact that Roger Penske, before he agreed to come back to IMSA competition with the DPI program, had that written into the sporting code. So, if it's there and he makes the change, the reality is probably we don't need to turn up, do we?
No, actually, we're going to try and save money on travel budgets. Really, just get a lot more rest. Take more naps next season. So, yes, IMSA, please send our friends at Penske. But granted, what if other teams that don't use polished wheels switch to polished? But see, if they do, then maybe we need to turn up and hold the championship, Graham. I don't know if we thought that through.
This is where the smart people come into play.
It's almost like we need a third person on this podcast, because that one's a bit of a mind bender for us. Maybe that's the perfect answer we need provided on social media. If the rest of the DPI team show up with polished wheels, should we hold a championship next year? And if not, should we just give it to Penske? So you let us know. We'll tell IMSA. They listen to us. They look to us for all answers. Clearly they look to us for how to do what they do. All right, I think you're about ready to set sail here. Thanks for everyone for sending in questions on very short notice. Thank you to those who sent in questions last week on Reddit, Facebook, and Twitter that we said we would hold, that we frankly kind of missed, that we would hold and blend as many as possible into this week's episode. Thank you to Cooper Tires. Thank you to Graham Goodwin, Daily Sports Car, my co-pal, my co-pilot. Thanks to you all for just the continual kind notes of support and encouragement. And we'll look forward to speaking to everyone next week in the next episode of Graham Goodwin,
The Week in Sports Cars podcast, with me, Graham Goodwin, and you, Marshall Pruett.